Good morning, everybody. I'm Guillermo Morales, the president of HECFA, and I just got the sinking feeling that I was about to read scripture at church, so give me a second to process everything. All jokes aside, I want to welcome everybody here, and the first thing I want to say is remember the name Anton Rocio, and I'm going to get back to it at the end. So first of all, thank you to all of the folks that are here, all the ambassadors, storied histories, then the histories that sort of play into what we're here for today. The stories within the book Latinoland that we're going to speak to. And each person has their own story, especially when you come from such a varied background. A little bit about myself is I grew up in New York City, and my father worked during the day, my mother worked at night to support 4 kids in the middle of the city, but still had time to support the rest of the community when they needed help. No matter where we were, in my neighborhood it was mostly Caribbean, we all were brought together by la misma idioma, right? The same language, and the similarities in culture vice the differences in culture. And it made for a wonderful upbringing, growing up in New York City, experiencing so many different things at such an early age, something that's missing for a lot of people in the United States. And that brings me to the point of, I believe it's our job to spread that message, to spread those different stories, to stop looking at Latinos and Hispanics in one singular block and start looking at them for the singular things that they are, that come together to form one beautiful thing at the end in the United States. Just to finish up really quickly, and this plays into the stories, education is the key. My mother was a teacher. She still teaches ESL because she still wants to give back to the community, and she sees a whole new group of immigrants coming into the United States, and she's gonna, I think till the day she dies, she'll be in that church basement teaching folks how to learn English, and not only learn English, but to navigate the system. And that's the second point, is navigation of the system. It's one thing to have inclusion. It's another thing to present somebody a roadmap to success. And that roadmap is something that we here, at OES, but also in the State Department. I'm happen to be working for the State Department, giving that access and that ability to get to that education, to push it, and to hope for a better life for the next generation. And lastly, I said, remember Anton Rocio, right? So recently for my job, I had to go to Cuba, and that happens to be where my family is from. And I had never visited, of course, because of all the issues. And my father, I'd left at such a young age. And before I left, I asked him, what street did he grow up on? And he said, Anton Rocio. And the RSO that was there, the regional security officer was there, I sort of pulled him aside and I said, hey, I really got to do this. Do you think we could go? It was in downtown Havana. Can we look? It just felt like it was calling me. It felt like it was trying to bring me something and a closure. So I got to go, and I stood there and I imagined, and this is something that's very unique to a lot of immigrants. I stood there on the street where my father was born and raised, and then I imagined him playing, I imagined him doing all the things, and then I imagined him being sort of torn out of that and having to start new and having to build again in a new country, a country that gave us an unbelievable amount of opportunities and really brought us to where we are today as a family. It felt, there was a connection I had with him, even though he was 4,000 or 5,000 miles away. I felt like I was there with him at that very moment. And that's the experience of the Latino, Hispanic experience in the United States, that emotion, that passion, that circular story that always brings you back to the same place. So with that, I give it up to the, and I apologize, I'm terrible at this. I'm really I have to give it to Ambassador Mora, who'll be following me up. Thank you so much, sir, and thank you all.
You did great. You did great. Thank you so much. Well, good morning, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. On the occasion of Pan American Day, Pan American Week, it is both an honor and a privilege to extend my warmest greetings to each and every one of you. As we gather to commemorate the enduring bonds that unite us as nations, as peoples across the Americas, I am reminded of the profound significance of this moment in our shared history. Pan American Day stands as a testament to the vision, foresight of leaders who recognize the importance of fostering unity and cooperation among the nations of the Western Hemisphere. I want to recall the words of President John F. Kennedy, who remarked, and I quote, this occasion calls for not a formal pronouncement of faith in the destiny of the Americas, but an effort to create a practical means of turning that faith into a common experience of progress. End of quote. So we are reminded today of our collective responsibility to work towards a brighter and more prosperous future for all of us. As a proud Cuban American, I'm deeply cognizant of the rich tapestry of cultures, traditions, and histories that define our hemisphere. From the bustling streets of Havana to the vibrant neighborhoods of New York City and beyond, Latinos have made a deep and lasting contributions to the fabric of American society and to the foreign policy of the United States. Let me briefly highlight two such examples, both hailing from the state of New Mexico. Well, one from New Mexico, one from Colorado, I should say. The first is Marilucy Jaramillo. She was the first Hispanic American woman to be U.S. ambassador. She was U.S. ambassador to Honduras during the Carter administration. And of course, our own OAS Secretary for Administration and Finance, Ambassador Arnold Chacon, who I hope is here. Okay, he should be outside. Who, in addition to many other distinguished roles, served as the first Hispanic Director General of the United States Foreign Service. Marilucy Jaramillo was a champion of bilingual education and multiculturalism, having served, as I said, as ambassador in Honduras under the Carter administration, and later as one of my own predecessors at the U.S. Department of Defense. And Secretary Chacon, with over 4 decades of experience, has long been an advocate for human rights in Central America, as well as increased diversity in the United States Diplomatic Corps. We are very proud to have him here at the OAS, at the OAS Secretary. And so, it is this spirit of resilience, creativity, perseverance that we welcome today and reflect on the achievements and aspirations of our shared heritage. In this vein, I am now honored to introduce our distinguished guest, Maria Arana, whose literary endeavors have served as a beacon of light, from her definitive, masterful history of Simón Bolívar to illuminating, as she will show today, the diverse experience and voices within the Latino community. Through her evocative storytelling and profound insights, Marie has captured the essence of Latino identity in her latest book, inviting readers to embark on a journey of discovery and understanding. This book, Latinoland, is a testament to the transformative power of literature that transcends borders and bridges divides. By shedding light on the complexities and nuances of Latino identity, she challenges us to confront preconceived notions and embrace the rich diversity that defines us here in the Americas. It is through her work that we are reminded of the importance of empathy, compassion, and solidarity in our collective pursuit of a more just and equitable world. Furthermore, I want to express my sincere gratitude to the supporters of today's event, of course, the Columbus Memorial Library, the Washington Office on Latin America, and particularly the U.S. Department of State's Hispanic Employee Council of Foreign Affairs Agencies, HECFA. HECFA is a deeply committed to promoting diversity and inclusion within our international affairs community. It is through collaborative efforts such as today that we're able to amplify and diverse voices and create spaces for meaningful dialogue and exchange. To this end, I am proud to highlight the efforts of the United States under the Biden-Harris administration to advance Hispanic representation and empowerment. From appointing the most diverse cabinet in American history to championing initiatives that uplift Latino communities, the United States is committed to fostering inclusivity and equity in every aspect of governance. This, of course, serves to better inform and guide our diplomatic engagement in the Americas, including here at the OAS. Now, as we embark on today's literary journey with Marie, we celebrate the richness of Latino identity and the profound impact of storytelling in shaping our understanding of the world around us. I hope today's discussion will serve as a catalyst for deeper introspection, dialogue, and engagement as we all work together towards a brighter and more inclusive future, here at home and throughout the Americas. So once again, thank you all for being here today. I want to just take a second to recognize a dear friend to all of us, Ambassador Luigi Einaudi, who has joined us here today. Former Assistant Secretary General, former ambassador to the OAS, one of my predecessors, and someone who I have learned and continue to learn from immensely. So as they say, Marie, yes? So with the chair of the Permanent Council's indulgence, I will use language that we often use in the Permanent Council, which is to say, Marie, the floor is now yours.
Buenos dias. Good morning to all. Thank you for the honor and the pleasure of joining you on this celebration of Pan American Day. It's a glorious occasion with much resonance for me, and I'm deeply honored to be here at the invitation of Ambassador Mora and in the company of such distinguished colleagues. Thank you so much, and thanks to all of you for coming to listen. For me, the Pan-American idea goes all the way back to the 1820s, 200 years to be exact. It's an idea very close to my heart because the dream of a unified region is so firmly tied to the subject of one of my books, the indomitable visionary Simón Bolívar, liberator of 6 republics, whose revolutionary exploits covered more terrain, more years of struggle, and more human sacrifice than any other war for independence that I can think of. The idea of union was very much alive in Bolívar's mind. His dream from the start was to join the newly liberated colonies from Panama to Potosí, to create a firm coalition, a strong nation of like-minded people, a formidable bulwark against any predator nation, banded together as the Estados Unidos de Latinoamérica the newly freed colonies of Spain would be self-sufficient, a force for progress, a new world power. Unidad, unidad, unidad. Bolívar repeated those words again and again from the very start of his revolution, even before the liberation of his own Venezuela. Eventually, his call to union would give birth to a landmark meeting in Panama in June of 1826, almost 200 years ago. That dream of unity of Bolívar's never came to be, at least in its vision of a single confederation, but the idea lived on. And now, standing here in this hall, I'm reminded of the brilliance and the power of the concept. Of course, that is the central mission of this magnificent institution, the Organization of American States, with its efforts to join the Americas in our quest for mutual hemispheric interests, to lift up one another, to promote democracy, to champion and defend human rights, to foster progress, equality, prosperity, to create inter-American cooperation. I firmly believe that Bolívar's dream lives here in these halls. I also firmly believe that it lives in people like me and perhaps you, Latinos, Hispanos, Hispanics, Latinx, Latine, whatever you want to call us, the people with roots in Latin America who live, work, raise our families, and bet our fortunes on the United States of America. My new book, Latinoland, is about us, the American Latinos, the emissaries of America Latina, the inheritors of the grand experiment that is Latin America, an experiment unlike any other that has conjoined more races and ethnicities and cultures and created the most diverse population on the planet. When I first arrived to this country from Peru as a 9-year-old child, the United States Census counted 2 million of us, largely Mexican Americans. In fact, there were 3 categories that you could check on the US Census: white, black, or Mexican. Today, that population is 64 million, and it includes Latinos from more than 20 origin countries, which is to say that in my own lifetime, I have seen the Latino population in this country grow from 2 to 64 million. It is a staggering rate of growth. It also could be a more efficient way of counting. The Mexicans were not counting themselves as Latinos in the beginning. They were told to count themselves as white so that they could vote. And that's what they did. So we don't know the exact numbers, really. The Latino population today represents the 2nd largest Spanish-speaking nation on earth, second only to Mexico. If you were to consider it as a country unto itself, it would boast the 5th largest gross domestic product, GDP, in the world. In the world, the 5th largest. It is a behemoth, a colossal agglomeration. It has a mighty presence in the American economy and a huge potential for even more growth. It's a population of many cultures and colors. We Latinos are black, white, East Asian, South Asian, indigenous, and sometimes, like me, we are a combination of all the above. We are fiercely loyal to our origin countries in the 1st generation, and then by the 3rd, we find our grandchildren blending into the American landscape, often losing their Spanish along the way. We are the segment that most intermarries with other races and ethnicities in this country, creating generations that are even more crossbred than when we left and came here. But still, we keep identifying ourselves as Hispanic. Here in the United States, we become Latinos, Hispanics, Latinx, or whatever label is imposed on us, and those labels are imposed on us. Even though we arrived as Cubanos or Dominicanos or Hondureños or Chilenos, once here we are members of that special breed. We are, as the Peruvian intellectual José Carlos Mariátegui once wrote, not a race, a nation, a state, a language, a culture. We are the simultaneous transcendence of all these things through something so modern, so unknown, that we still have no name. So modern, so unknown. In fact, the concept of United States Latinidad in this country, Hispanicity, would never have been thinkable when this building was inaugurated in 1910. It would have been unthinkable in 1948 when the OAS Charter was created, and it was still unthinkable many years later when I arrived in New Jersey as a child and was told by the girl next door that I was Mexican, because that's what Spanish-speaking people are. In truth, Hispanics have been part of the American story since the foundation of this country. Latinos have fought in every war the United States ever prosecuted, including the American Revolution. The first admiral of the United States Navy, David Farragut, a hero of the Civil War, was a Hispanic. It was he who said so famously, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." What schoolchild will find that in her school book? His statue, which sits a few blocks from the White House on Farragut Square, nor his bust, which sits in the lobby of the Army-Navy Club on Farragut Square, none of these mentions his origins. But his father, Jorge Ferragut, was born on one of the Balearic Islands. He fought tirelessly for the patriots in the American Revolution. There is no monument to that man. The facts are so little known, the history so erased, the burgeoning population still invisible. Through history, Latinos in this country have forged scientific discoveries, built the railroads, plowed the fields, played the music, written the stories, grown the food. We still do. A Latino invented the electron microscope that sits in your doctor's office. Another developed the prototype for the color television. The surgical stent, the latest technique in brain surgery, the forerunner of the e-book, the birth control pill. All of these were invented by Latinos. Are children taught this in school today? Today, the country's economy would collapse without Latino labor. We represent 44% of all growth in American small businesses. That's 10 times the national rate. We are an engine of economic progress. We talk about Latin music, Hispanic heritage, Latinx culture, the Latino vote, as if we were one consolidated entity, even though the differences among us can be so pronounced. And yet we feel unity. Cubans party with Venezuelans, Puerto Ricans marry Mexicans. I know quite a number of their children. They call themselves Mexicanos. A woodworker from Honduras works shoulder to shoulder with a mason from El Salvador. We are totally familiar with each other's cuisine, with the difference between an empanada made by a Colombian and one made by a Chilena, between un tamal hecho en México y una hallaca venezolana y una humita de Argentina. And it certainly is not unusual for us to feel the power of one another's storytelling. Not unusual for a Peruvian like me to feel that Samantha Schweblin, a porteña short story writer, speaks for me. Not unusual for the distinguished writer Sandra Cisneros, a Chicana, to be persuaded that her life is reflected within the covers of Juno Diaz's books, A Dominican. Here in America, we become the simpáticos that Bolivar hoped for. And so Latinos have become, in all our splendid variety, the quintessence of American diversity, representatives of every race, the most mixed blood population on earth, the chameleons of humanity, if you will. We are the very essence of inclusivity, the very essence of American unity, and the very essence of the Pan-American ideal. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maria. That was a great start to the event. Just before we start, the event is being live streamed and it will be recorded and disseminated on the AOS website. And also I would be remiss if I didn't mention that my good friend and colleague, Ambassador Alejandra Solano, has joined us today from Costa Rica. Thank you for being here, Ambassador. So a little bit of the run of show, as we say. I will be moderating the discussion with panelists that I'll introduce in a second. We will go as far as we can go, but we want to make sure that there is time for questions and comments from the audience, hence the microphone there in the middle of the hall. So we will have time for your participation as well. So let me introduce real quickly our distinguished panelists. Next to Marie is a seasoned diplomat, my good friend, also Chet Nemore. He is the the permanent representative of the Bahamas to the OAS, and very importantly, the chair of the Permanent Council here for the next few months. Chet, thank you so much for being here. Next to Ambassador Nemore is Ambassador Conque, Gonzalo Conque. He is the Chief of Staff to the Secretary General. He has served as the permanent representative of Uruguay to the United Nations. Gonzalo, thank you for being here. And then certainly Carolina Jimenez, I think everyone also knows, is the Executive Director of the Washington Office on Latin America, WOLA, and has been a strong supporter of this event. Thank you all for being here. So let me, I'll start with sort of general questions based on Marie's book and Marie's comments. So start with Marie and then we'll work ourselves down. You know, Marie, here at the OAS, we've been talking quite a bit about inclusion and diversity as a fundamental element of democracy. At a time when democracy sees itself under threat in the region, one of the challenges is the issue of marginalization, the continued persistent problem of marginalization and inclusion. That is also an issue here in the United States, isn't it? Particularly when you think about Latinos. So it's a little open-ended, but I want to give you sort of ample time to sort of delve into this question of inclusion, marginalization, social inclusion or exclusion, and how we can, in a hemisphere that's so interconnected, work together to address this issue.
Well, this is I think, the fundament of our invisibility. Because, you know, even though we are 64 million, 20% now, and projected to be 30% by the year 2060, I think other Americans are always asking us who we are. It is a disease of invisibility, I think, that hounds us. And part of that, I have to say, Ambassador, probably comes from our tendency to keep our heads down. The Latino population is the hardest working population, I think, that you'd ever find in this country. When you look at the questions of what is most important to this population, they will say right away, jobs. Jobs are the most important thing. The economy is the most important thing. There are those, you know, political activists who go out saying, well, we want you to be more included. We want there to be more diversity. We want there to you to be represented. That almost doesn't seem to matter when you look at the polls and you see what it matters to them is really work, and it's jobs, and it's the economy. So I think we create this a bit in ourselves, keeping our heads down, doing the work. And in many areas, I mean, there are places in Texas that are towns that are largely Mexican Americans, and only 17% of them turn out to vote. They're citizens, but the voting, they're not convinced that the vote will do much for them. So I think it begins there. I would say that that's my sense of that. And then, of course, it comes back as a mirror. If you're not participating, if you're not in the schools, making sure that the teacher knows who you are and who your children are. If you're not at the polls and voting, then you don't exist. And that is sort of the situation that we have now. This huge body of contributing force of people who have a long history of contribution, but are not really counted in the way that they should be.
Excellent. Thank you. So this is a pretty diverse panel, right? Cuban American, family from Peru, Chet is from the Bahamas, Gonzalo from Uruguay, and Carolina from Venezuela. Right? So to the rest of the panel, starting with you, Mr. Chair, we grapple with these issues of inclusion and diversity, right, at the hemispheric level. From your perspective, from your own experience, not just as ambassador, but your own experience, as you look to other countries and see these issues and its effect on democracy, what can you say about the same question of the challenges of social inclusion and diversity and the need to strengthen democracy?
Sorry. Good morning, all. I'd like to thank the sponsors, and I'd like to thank you, Ambassador Mora, for inviting me, not only as the chair. I trust that you invited me as being Chet, but nonetheless, thank you very much. I'd also like to extend a special and warm welcome to Ambassador Einaudi. I started to read your book. I'm still learning democracy myself. So, I'm not quite Gen Z, I'm not Gen X, but my experiences over the years in respect of inclusion have been varied. I've served as an ambassador, so on the diplomatic scale, it was a more welcoming sort of endeavor. As a student coming into, I studied in the United States primarily, and coming into the United States, it wasn't quite a culture shock because I come from the Bahamas where we have a lot of tourists, so I was exposed to various countries. But what I was not exposed to was really about the matter of racism and discrimination. And because in the Bahamas, it really was a matter of which island you came from, so there wasn't a question of differences. I came from a middle class family within the Bahamas, but when I came over to the United States, it was a little different. I was viewed as something not quite invisible, but something threatening, and that was stark to me. But as I went on, it was really about conversing, facing it head on, and being able to have these cultural exchanges. And as time went on, we all recognized that there wasn't a difference as vast as we may have thought about it. When you get into the exclusion areas, it's really about economic exclusion. Development opportunities weren't quite open. Irrespective of you probably having a sense of wealth, you still didn't have access. You didn't have the opportunities that was presented to others. What I did find that was different from being from the Caribbean was that, and different from being here in the United States, was how we approached the issue really wasn't about honing in on your challenges, honing on whatever it is that you're facing, is really about trying to get over the bridge and get over to the point of saying, you and I are brothers, you and I are sisters. And as I said, as time went on, I didn't feel it, I didn't see it, but there is still an underlying current. I can't speak to any real negative experiences that has been so profound that it has tainted my outlook on building a closer Americas. As a matter of fact, my experiences in the Organization of American States has given me great hope. When we get in the room and when we get in the Permanent Council, we all look towards a unified solution. So, I'm very pleased to be on this panel to also hear and learn from others as to what their experiences may be. I also want to congratulate you on your book. And also to say that as an expression as well, your name is Maria Arana. We also have Aranas in the Bahamas as well. We also have Moors in the Bahamas as well. So, there isn't that great disparity. So when you want to come over and visit your cousins, please let me know.
Gonzalo.
Thank you. Latinoland. Good morning, Ambassador Mora. Thank you, Frank. Feliz, happy Pan American Week and happy Pan American Day yesterday to all of you. Thanks to the U.S. Mission and the Biblioteca Colón for organizing this important panel with the important presence of Maria Arana, basically, and my colleagues in the panel. I'm very honored to be here. Let me start by saying I read the book not as thoroughly as I would have liked, because I had to read this more than 400 pages in like 4 or 5 days. If I hadn't been pressed by time, maybe I wouldn't have read it in 3-4 days, but it wouldn't have been beyond 6-7 days, because congratulations is really a book that it is very difficult to put aside when you start it. It is really difficult to put aside. I was going to say it should be mandatory. It is not necessary to make it mandatory, because when you start reading it really flows in a not only because of it is a scholarly book to start with. It's a lot of information, but a lot of information systematized, a lot of information absolutely studied and vetted and checked here and there. But at the same time, it has a cadence, tiene una cadencia, tiene un ritmo que hace realmente muy fácil de leer y muy atrapante. And in this sense, it is a book with which I learned. Of course, you learn from every book you read, but in this case, I learned, of course, from every story that appears in the book, but I learned history from some of our Latin American countries. I'm not mentioning the Caribbean here because it doesn't focus on Caribbean countries, but I learned history from some of our Latin American countries with episodes crucial, critical in their history, and that I must confess, I did not know. I will not reveal which ones, not to reveal my ignorance, but it is a book with which I really learned. And it is a book with which is very easy to connect from the perspective that, sorry, I will invoke here a personal experience. This is a place in which people don't usually speak in primera persona del singular because everybody is representing a country. In the case of ambassadors, good morning, ambassador. Good morning, ambassadors, embajadoras, embajador. Good morning, Ambassador Einaudi. It's a pleasure to see you again. This is a place where people don't usually speak in primera persona del singular because nadie se representa a sí mismo. We are those who work in the General Secretariat. We represent some part of the institutionality of the organization, and those ambassadors and represent diplomats that represent member states, they of course represent their nations. But I was going to say that I was to invoke a personal experience. In my past career, I was consul of my country, of Uruguay. This was in Europe. But that makes you relate to these micro stories that appear during the book and that really show you the commonalities that we Latin Americans have. Of course, the book is about the Latin American community and of Latin American origin in the United States. But I can extrapolate it, lo puedo extrapolar, if extrapolate is a word in English, to some things I've seen in my consular career, for instance, in Spain, where, of course, we have the same language in Spain, but accents reveal your origin in every... and coming back to the original question about inclusion and diversity, yes, of course. Inclusion and diversity is one of the main subjects of Maria Arana's book. I would say it's a thread that goes across the book in every sense. And it is absolutely related to the work in this Organization of American States. Without inclusion, without diversity, we don't have democracy. We don't have human rights. We don't have, at the end of the day, development. We don't have, at the end of the day, neither security. So it is absolutely intertwined with the concepts that we work with in this organization. And it's a book that it is really recomendable leer para todos quienes trabajamos, for all those of us who work in these subjects of inter-American matters and international relations, including migration, diversity, inclusion. Gracias, Frank.
Thank you, Ambassador. Carolina, please.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Mora, thank you, Ambassador Mora, for hosting us today in this beautiful hall that I think we all love. And thank you for also organizing so many activities around Pan American Day and Pan American Week, because in complex times, celebrating ourselves is important, and I think we can all appreciate that. Marie, gracias por tu libro. Thank you for your book. For me, it was like a large window that allowed me to see a diverse, complex, often unseen and invisible, yet fundamental landscape of a much larger picture. The Latino community in the United States, the Latinx community in the United States, the Latina community in the United States. And that shows already the complexity that your book so well describes. But because of the work I do, and the Washington Office on Latin America, WOLA has one mission: to advocate for human rights and democracy in the Americas. So you can imagine how busy we are these days and how challenging this job is. I read your book through those lenses. What does this book tell us about democracy in the Americas? And authors like Steve Lavisky and very famous scholars on democracy have often said that we have built a proliferation of innovative concepts that stretch the definition of democracy too far. So they argue that we have given democracy too many adjectives. Radical democracy, liberal democracy, Republican democracy, protagonistic democracy, participatory democracy. The list of adjectives is very long, and that has really stretched the concept too far. And yet, especially after reading your book, I'm not afraid of the adjective. On the contrary, I think one of the most interesting discussions in academia these days is precisely the concept of diverse democracy. And Professor Terry Carl and others are arguing that we still need to ask ourselves what type of democracy we want, and adjectives are necessary. And your book shows the diversity within the diversity. And it also shows that without inclusion of that diversity, democracy doesn't work at its full potential. One of the quotes that I like the most among the many quotes you have in your book is the one by Jorge Ramos, the journalist, that says, "This country is the mother of second chances. And through stories that you point at your book, like Central Americans, coming to the US after very traumatic experiences or fleeing extreme poverty, climate change, like Tanita and Raimundo, characters in your book, you show that indeed, when inclusion happens, democracy happens. When inclusion happens, this diverse community can have the second chance that they could not have in their countries of origin. And I think that is at the core of your book, and I know your book is not a book about democracy, but it's impossible not to think about it and not to ask ourselves the questions of what including this immense diversity means for the United States, but also for Latin America. I think your book is an urgent call for us to make the Latino community visible, for us to think about concepts such as diverse democracy, and for us to have a serious and well-informed debate about complex issues such as immigration. And precisely because I think all of us believe in democratic principles, I think we can all agree that we will be much better off if we debate democracy and immigration without a narrative that dehumanizes otherness and demonizes immigrants. And I really appreciate that at the end of your book, or almost at the end of your book, you ask yourself one key question: what do Latinos want? And you answer the question beautifully: the same thing Americans want. A decent life for themselves, for their families, and for the communities. And I believe that is possible only if we defend democratic principles and the human rights of every person. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. So let's drill a little deeper in terms of specifics. So Marie, in response to the first question, talked about the importance of voting. Sometimes Latino communities not understanding the power that comes with that. So starting with you, Carolina, and then working ourselves back, from your own perspectives, what are the specific strategies or initiatives that can be implemented at the local, regional, hemispheric levels to address this issue of disempowerment or marginalization, of not being aware or empowered through participation? What are the strategies and initiatives, as you see it from where you work, from where you stand, what are those strategies and initiatives that we need to empower Latinos, for example, and other groups to come to the forefront?
I would say there are different strategies at different levels. And because I'm at the OAS, then I will speak more about the hemispheric regional strategies. And it's something that we in civil society do a lot when we come to talk to you and to many other ambassadors to discuss issues that are relevant for the countries you represent. There needs to be a clear and solid defense of democracy. And that needs to come from all of us, from citizens that should be more empowered to vote, to be represented, and to fight for the result of their votes, but also from the countries and the representatives, from the leaderships. It is well known that the Americas have seen in the last few decades or so a democratic deficit. And I think we can only fight that deficit if there is a regional consensus and agreement that democracy is the best form of government for the region. And when you look at the data, it's very alarming. You know, in 2010, Latin Barometer asked Latin Americans, do you believe democracy to be the best form of government? 63% said yes. In 2023, they asked the same question, and only 48% said yes. So I think the defense of democracy and educating citizens of the Americas in democracy is very key. And then, ideally, and I know this can be very complex because all governments have different interests, I think the leadership exercised by regional powers should think of being leadership by example. If you support a democratic government here, support the other one as well. Supporting some democratic governments and then promoting some undemocratic governments is very problematic when it comes to building the narrative around democracy. And I think a very important thing to do for you know, a forum like this, like the OS, is to make sure that we hold all undemocratic governments accountable and we promote all democratic governments to be stronger and to support democratic transitions where democracy does not exist.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yes, I agree. Hello, hello. Yes, I agree. Defending democracy and defending human rights in the hemisphere, it's the key for people to, of course, feel included and be included, which is the way in which the democracies work. But it even goes, and of course, we have this at the Organization of American States, we have it reflected in the legal instruments that are the framework of this organization. The OAS Charter, the Inter-American Democratic Charter, that is reflected in this legal framework and in this values framework within which we work every day here at the organization. But it goes even beyond, I would say. It goes beyond the legal instruments, it goes beyond the political systems, it goes also to Latin American values and Latino values in the region. Even I was thinking when I was reading the book, but I was thinking when I was preparing what to say today, which I changed a lot. I was thinking, even those countries that do not comply, from our region, that do not comply with the democratic principles, with the democratic instruments, that do not fulfill what the OAS Charter mandate and the Inter-American Democratic Charter mandate, even those countries, we all know, of course, which countries I'm talking about, they don't reject Latin American values, at least in the talking point. You listen to them, the talking point, they defend the Latin American values. Okay, I would say que los tergiversan, sin duda, but these Latin American values are accepted by the whole Latin American community in a sense. And there is somewhere where it is maybe possible to work. The history of our region, of course, and in this, the book, it is, one learns a lot from the book in terms of history of the region. It's a history of tragedy in many senses. A tragic history for many of our countries, all of our countries at a certain point in their history, and it is, in a way, to a history of decline. A history of decline, the book explains it thoroughly, and of course it is always subject to interpretation. There's this Uruguayan professor of political science many decades ago that said, when Great Britain was rising, Spain was declining, and that was the origin of the problem of many of the Latin American countries. They were huérfanos de metrópoli. Se quedaron sin metrópoli en un momento en que era crucial para el desarrollo de los países, y de ahí se origina. Carlos Realeazúa was the Uruguayan scientist who said that. But the history of the region is a history of tragedy in so many ways that we must be anchored in the values that we share. And of course, these values, they have to be reflected in what we have here in this building. I'm not saying the physical building. We have we are in right now, but this building, this legal building and this building of values and culture that we have in the Organization of American States. Vale mucho lo que tenemos como organización, vale mucho tener una carta de la OEA que dice lo que dice y vale mucho tener una carta democrática interamericana. Entonces, sin ánimo de ser complaciente, porque no estoy hablando de la Secretaría General, estoy hablando de los países, creo que ese trabajo conjunto among countries, really, it is really worth it, and it is something, it is a way in which we should persevere as a region.
Thank you, Gonzalo. So we're going to, before I go to Chet and Maria, I want to make sure that you're all getting ready to ask your questions. We're running out of time quickly in this discussion. So after Maria answers the question, I'm going to turn to you for your questions and comments, and then we're going to have closing remarks from Dr. Betilde Munoz-Bokosian, who from the Department of Social Inclusion, who will wrap things up. So, Chet?
Well, I indicated earlier, or if you don't know, I'm an economist by training, so everything has to have some correlation or relationship to finances and so forth. So, in respect of being able to spread the word of democracy, first of all, you need to build investor confidence. You need to have an illustration that democracy works. There are, you know, and forgive me, I am in the United States. I was trained in the United States, so I will continue to refer to my exposure. Checks and balances, James Madison, when he thought about it, there was, prior to him, there was Polybus. And the Greek understanding of checks and balances was built around this principle of accountability and transparency. We've been hearing it a lot here in the OAS recently, a lot. And what does that mean? That means that you need to build a democratic system and accepted warts and all. And that's for the good, the bad, and the indifferent. And do we have enough cases in the region where we've seen this? You know, you have a lot of political platforms and political platitudes, but do they translate into policies and programs that are implementable and that they are equitable? So in order for us to here, as we do continue to do our work, and as we draw from the works of authors like Marie, if I can call you Marie, you and I have been sitting together for 5 minutes, so I take certain liberties. I now know you very well. If we can draw from the works and experiences that are reflected in these types of literature, it does not just apply to Marie's experience in her homeland or her experiences as she goes abroad. It is something that we should have throughout. You know, we talked earlier about, I think she'd used the term, and I wrote it down specifically, you talked about the tapestry. So we build this tapestry and we build this fabric over the hemisphere, but the consistent thread has to be consistent. It can't be democracy in the Bahamas is different from democracy in the United States, different from democracy in Haiti, different from democracy elsewhere. What we see as being democratic is something that should be consistent.
Thank you, Chet. Marie?
I really do agree with everything that's been said here. It's really wonderful comments. For me, there are really two things that stand out to me. The first is the great pillar of democracy, which is education. And education is very scant about the Latino population here and the contributions that we have made to this country all along. The school children just don't know that, George Washington thanked the Hispanic involvement in the American Revolution, for instance, because it was the Spanish and the people of the Caribbean who were recruited, who actually came up the river and gave ammunition to George Washington's troops. Now, you're not going to read that in any textbook. You're not going to read that hear it in the schoolroom. So what does that do? If you're talking about diversity and inclusion, you have to realize these things, these absolute guideposts of history and who participated in what way. So education to me is just the essence, really, of what we want and the strategy that we should take. The second thing that's important to me is representation. Now, Representative Joaquin Castro from Texas went around to these big media corporations and he talked to the corporate leaders and he asked them, name me 3 famous or contributing or important Latinos, and most of them couldn't name one, which is appalling when you think of it. This is the media. This is the voice of America, and so representation means to me you get people in the boardrooms. There are only 1% of the major corporations in this country have 1% of those boardrooms are Latinos. So, and you look at Hollywood or the television industry, and it hovers around 3%, 4%. It's way off the percentages that we represent in this country. So for me, all of these things that have been said by my colleagues here are super important, but foundationally for me, it's the minds of the children, the education, the getting them to feel that involvement and that ownership of power and of the possibility of power in those 2 ways.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you for that. So turn the mic over to you, and I see our good friend Luigi Arnaldi had raised his hand prior. So if we can get the mic to Ambassador Arnaldi. You can bring it to him, but.
Thank you. I just want to give an emphatic congratulations to Frank for using Pan American Day obligations to do something useful for a change, to the panel for the breadth of what it has given in support of Maria Arana's basic idea, which I found enormously refreshing. The Charter of the OAS in its preamble says that the mission of America is to offer man a land of liberty. For many years I cited that and said, oh boy, were they old-fashioned and they just spoke about man and didn't include woman. In thinking that way, I was missing the bigger point. The bigger point is liberty. In this world, which by the computer and the cell phone that enslaves us, we've been robbed really of the power of the common uniting ideal. And Marie gave us the uniting ideal of the new world, which was to find and to found and now to build a land of liberty. And then it was easier as an ideal to understand in the days when Europe was riven first by monarchies and the rich, and then by dictatorship in the 30s. But the fact is that that ideal of democracy, which builds into it the idea of inclusion, supported by some understanding of history, which is why it is vital to support the OAS and the Columbus Memorial Library. For example, Marie, I will add another item from the Wars of Independence. How many people realize today that soldiers set out from Haiti to join the forces of Bolivar to help the independence of the Americas? I think that, well, I've said enough. Let us support education, let us support representation, but let us above all keep our heads high in terms of the ideal of the Americas.
Thank you. Thank you.
My name is Emma Violan Sanchez. I am a proud immigrant from Bolivia. I have been an educator for more than 40 years. I thank you for your book. Education is what makes a difference in our population. What I would like for us to reinforce the idea not just of Latinos, but let's not forget our 12 million immigrants that are undocumented. I have the privilege right now to lead an organization that provides college scholarships and mentoring to students who, due to their immigration status, is a barrier to higher education. These are students that may have come here when they were 4 months old, or they may have just crossed the border 2 years ago. So we have students from all over the world. But it is, I think, very important that our schools, that our students, thanks to Plyer versus Doe, students who are undocumented can go to public schools. So these students, all our students, need to learn more about Latin America. Unfortunately, when I was on the school board, there were 4 pages in our social studies book at the elementary level about Latin America. And there were 4 pages about the fact that Aztecs committed crimes. That is our history in our public schools. We must change. Thank you for your book, and I look forward to it.
Thank you. So, Maria, I don't know if you want to, yes,
If I may, my
go ahead.
sincerest apologies. I'll have to slip next door to a
Please.
signing of monies for the organization. So pardon me for a minute. I really appreciate it, and congratulations again on your book. Right. Apologies.
Marie, would you like to sort of comment on particularly the issue of the undocumented immigrants and the issue of education that she raised?
Absolutely. You know, there's such misconceptions about, first of all, how we as Latinos feel about the situation at the border right now. I think we are equally appalled by the situation at the border. There will be the majority of Latinos feel very strongly that the border is out of control. We have not had any legislation that addresses immigration for more than 35 years. It's been almost 40 years since the last act that truly confronted the immigration problem. So this is a failure of governance, and we all know it, and we all feel it, specifically among Latinos who may even have crossed the border, feel very strongly about this. The undocumented are, at this point, net zero burden on the American government budget. I think very few people realize that. The undocumented very often own their homes, work, pay their taxes, and this is little known. I mean, and I think so many think that the majority of us are undocumented. They did, the Pew Research Center did polls on the number that Americans feel, the percentage. And the undocumented is a very small percentage, but there are Americans who believe that the good 40% of Latinos are undocumented, which is ridiculous, you know, but this is the perception, and it's the perception that's taken by virtue of the fact that the media is very much focused on the border, as it should be, because it is a huge problem. But the issue is so overblown. I did a column for the New York Times about 2 weeks ago in which I addressed this question that, you know, you can't say that Latinos are represented by the issue on the border. And that perception really needs to change, and the media needs to change its tune about us.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Thank you. Hi, Marie. Thank you for your books. I read a couple of them. I was wondering what discoveries about Latinos stood out during your research and interviews for your book, Latinoland.
What interesting research or findings did you get as you were doing your work that comes out in your book?
I think the real feeling that I got in the process of researching this book, and I did 237 interviews with people at every level, with corporate heads, CEO of AT&T, for instance, who was a Cuban, who was one of the Pedro Panes, who came over when he was 4 years old and didn't see his parents for 4 years. He went on to be a very good student and went on to be the CEO of AT&T, speaking to someone at that level, and yet speaking to someone who might have been a worker in a potato field in Iowa, or a plumber in Chicago who had come across the border at the age of 14 and now had a huge plumbing operation in Chicago. So you're talking to every level, people who were out of work, people who were holding 3 jobs, and speaking to all of these people. And the picture, the very strong picture that I have is counter to those pages that our questioner, who was just leaving, mentioned about the projected image in Hollywood, let's say, where most of us are villains or criminals or menial workers. This portrait of true resilience, and these are the words that I've heard from other people here today: resilience, perseverance, the dedication to working toward a better life, to all the principles I think that we need in a functioning democracy. I was very moved by the portrait, the general portrait of people I spoke to and the research that I did. The numbers totally blew me away at every turn. The numbers of the reactions to us, the numbers of what we had done, the representation that is unrecognized in the American society, the work that we need to do, all of those things. My research was surprising in every way. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Maria. So to end the session, I'm going to invite Dr. Betile Munoz-Pogosian to give some closing remarks. Betile is with the Department of Social Inclusion at the OAS Secretariat.
Thank you, Ambassador. Good morning, everyone, and a special greeting to Ambassador Einaudi. It's an honor, sir, to have you here. Let me start first by extending Secretary Plata's apologies, excuses for not being able to be here with us today. I join her in thanking the Permanent Mission of the United States and the OAS Columbus Memorial Library for the invitation to the Secretariat for Access to Rights and Equity to join the conversation this morning to commemorate Pan American Day and the launch of Maria Arana's Latinoland. This year with a cross-cutting theme focusing on the promotion of cultural diplomacy as well as the promotion of social equity. As I prepared to deliver these brief closing remarks, I kept pondering about the question of why it is still relevant 134 years after the first International Conference of American States took place to celebrate Pan-Americanism, to work to preserve it and to ensure that new generations are aware of it. At least 3 ideas came to mind, 3 answers, and they go, this idea of commemorating Pan-Americanism for the region, I believe is still relevant because it reminds us, firstly, of the idea of cooperation as the way countries in the region have historically related to each other based on the principle of regional solidarity, especially considering the diversity among countries and within countries that we've heard of today, as necessary to preserve the goals of peace and security, representative democracy, and peace enshrined in the OAS Charter. It also reminds us of what is behind an institution like the OAS as the default forum to generate political dialogue and regional cooperation, not for the sake of dialogue and cooperation, but to serve the people of the Americas and to provide them with concrete solutions to their most pressing problems. And finally, this day, and especially the theme of social equity of this 2024 commemoration, gives us the perfect justification to pause and take stock of the progress, or limited progress, I shall say, we have made in terms of achieving equity and social inclusion for all citizens of the Americas, and to bring rights closer to people's everyday life. And it is in this last point in which I want to offer some reflections, very briefly. The people of the Americas have historically suffered the impact of decades of poverty and inequality. Back in 2012, the renowned Nobel laureate economist Joseph Stiglitz, in his book, The Price of Inequality, reflected on the role that perpetuating unjust advantages played in deteriorating social cohesion, democratic governance, and political stability. 12 years later, we live in a region where, according to the World Inequality Report, 50% of people living in poverty earn 10% of the total income produced, while the richest 10% earn 55%. And according to ECLAC, we are facing a historic increase in poverty up to 32%, a level that has not been seen in the region in previous decades. The context of this data is not merely to reference an economic standpoint, but rather to call and reflect on inequality as a multidimensional phenomenon that connects to the historic and systemic advantage of certain groups and the exclusion of others based on race, gender, geographical locations, disabilities, class, among other conditions. Who are those most affected by lack of opportunities in our region, and how has inequitable privilege and unjust advantage historically excluded large part of our region's populations from sustainable growth and access to social services and rights? These questions are not new to the OAS. In recent history, our member states have devoted efforts and attention to widening economic, political, and social inequalities, and have committed an institutional framework that looks to promote equal opportunity, social inclusion, and the eradication of poverty, and one that seeks to preserve democracy and access to rights for all citizens of the Americas. OAS member states were already addressing all these issues 23 years ago when they approved the Inter-American Democratic Charter, and 12 years ago when they approved the Social Charter of the Americas as an instrument that naturally complements the Inter-American Democratic Charter on the premise that the generation of prosperity and access to human rights without discrimination is vital to both democracy and development. The emphasis of our work here at the OAS on vulnerable populations provides a dynamic for cooperation and reciprocal assistance where traditionally excluded voices and perspectives are being considered today at the highest level of political dialogue in our region. Three specific areas of our work I wanted to mention that directly address the aspects relevant to this year's theme on Pan American Day include first our work on combating discrimination on all its forms. For over 2 decades, OAS member states have placed an intentional commitment to combat discrimination and intolerance at the center of their political dialogue and multilateral action. In this process, we have achieved significant advances, such as the approval of a catalog of inter-American instruments that represent the results of collective stock-taking of how systemic exclusion leads to marginalization, poverty, and multidimensional gaps in access to rights. At our Secretariat, we continue to work with member states that are engaged in promoting our inter-American conventions on the rights of persons with disabilities, on older persons, on racial and other types of discrimination and connected forms of intolerance, as well as the support in connecting member states' public policies to these instruments. An example of how the efforts of member states can be sought in strengthening public policy to address discrimination and promote inclusion include the work around the Inter-American Convention on Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities and the Program of Action for the Rights and Dignities for Persons with Disabilities, which has resulted recently on the launch of a regional observatory as an innovative tool to track member states' progress and reports. Member states who have engaged in these efforts can attest to the tangible results of coming together as an organization to actively promote inclusion through collaborations with academia, civil society, and other regional and international organizations. Our team continues supporting the development of powerful regional networks such as the RIAFRO, in partnering with teams and at other institutions of the Inter-American system like PAHO, the IDB, on topics such as access to health of Afro-descendants, populations, and the rights of older persons, among other activities. Second, I would also like to refer to our work on equity with an emphasis on social development and thus access to social services. That is part of our Ministerial on Social Development at the 5th ministerial meeting that took place in 2022 in the Dominican Republic. OAS member states renewed their commitment to further work to combat existing inequalities in social development through working groups that will be focused on measuring multidimensional security and designing public policies to prioritize the well-being of people. En esta agenda de equidad, quisiera también destacar la labor del Grupo de Trabajo del Protocolo de San Salvador. Actualmente este mecanismo constituye el instrumento más avanzado que tiene nuestra región para recaudar información sobre cómo las personas ejercen sus derechos económicos, sociales y culturales, puntualmente el derecho a la seguridad social, a la educación, que fue mencionado el día de hoy, a la salud, a la alimentación, al trabajo, a los derechos sindicales, al medio ambiente y a los beneficios de la cultura. Los Estados miembros que trabajan directamente con el grupo del Protocolo de San Salvador pueden sin duda confirmar el valor de la cooperación entre países y con los expertos también que se da en este espacio, especialmente enfocado en acercar los DESCA a grupos históricamente excluidos, tales como las personas LGBTI, los pueblos indígenas, las mujeres, las personas en situación de movilidad humana, entre otros. Este trabajo también ha sido clave para identificar cómo interactúan diferentes vulnerabilidades, lo que entendemos como interseccionalidad o discriminación múltiple, y el tipo de políticas y acciones gubernamentales que deben ponerse en marcha para cerrar brechas en el ejercicio de derechos. Finally, I would like to highlight SARE's work to engage civil society organizations at the OAS, and I'm very glad to see one represented in this panel today with Carolina here. In its 2022 flagship report entitled The Crisis of Inequality, the UN Research Institute for Social Development recognized that civil society participation at the local, national, and global level is key to creating a new social contract that inspires trust and promotes the well-being of people and the planet. Therefore, widening meaningful participation for NGOs in the multilateral system is of paramount importance. OAS member states have also been committed for over 2 decades to supporting and broadening spaces for dialogue and work with civil society. Today, we know that these efforts can provide new ways of coming together at the multilateral space and to support participation and collaboration with civil society on addressing inequalities. Para finalizar, pues estas son solo algunas ideas que dejamos sobre la mesa y que esperamos continúan siendo centrales a las actividades para conmemorar el Día del Panamericanismo. Avanzar hacia sociedades más justas y equitativas no es solo un imperativo moral, sino una condición necesaria para la gobernabilidad democrática, para la seguridad ciudadana y para el desarrollo sostenible por el que tanto han luchado desde el primer Congreso de Estados Americanos los países de nuestra región. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Matilde, for a very comprehensive list of things, of successes and accomplishments that the Inter-American system has done over the last few decades, and still the things that still we need to do. This brings an end to our session. I want to thank a few people before we conclude. First, I want to thank you all for being here, for celebrating with us Pan American Day, Pan American Week. As it's been said, this is a central theme of much of what we do here at the OAS: cooperation, dialogue, liberty, and a sense of unity and solidarity. I want to also thank Rocio from the Columbus Memorial Library, who is somewhere here, I hope. I mentioned her not only for her support, but also, Rocio's hiding, okay, there you are, but also to tell you that this has been and will continue to be one of the gems of this organization. So I hope that along with the museum that we can count on your support, as Ambassador Einaudi has done over the years, in supporting the library, in supporting the museum, that are so critical to everything we do, really, or much of what we do here at the organization. I want to thank our panelists, of course, for their participation and contribution to the discussion today. I want to thank my colleagues at the U.S. Mission, who I would love to take credit for all of this, but I can't, because that was done with the work of many people, including people who are here today from the mission. So thank you all for being here, for doing all that you did. Again, thank you, now that Chet's here, thank you, Carolina, Gonzalo, Chet, for your discussion. And of course, thank our author, Maria Arana, not just for, yes. Not just for being here with us and participating, but the contribution you've made with this book to Latinos, to our understanding of that community, the challenges, the opportunities, the stories that you tell in that book. I hope you keep spreading the good word as you do the book tour, and I hope this is not the last time you come to the OAS. You're always welcome. Thank you all again.